Now, we're probably all familiar with the term terrarium. A terrarium is actually an environment like a jar such as this, where we have got a little bit of growing media in there, some potting mix, and we can grow plants in there, given the right conditions, moisture, that sort of thing. It's a completely, in this case, sealed environment. And Tina, you know that the development of the terrarium was an accidental thing. It was developed by a guy called Dr. Ward, who was actually cultivating insects inside a glass case. Okay?
Moths.
Moths, exactly. And what he actually did was he put compost in the bottom of these, this case, if you like, and the compost had seeds in it, and the plants grew. And he was amazed, actually in wonder at the types of plants that he could grow in this closed environment.
Well, it's quite a happy accident, because not only do they look good, but they also teach us that if you can control your environment, you can pretty much grow whatever you like.
You sure can. And look, the amazing thing about these types of systems is the fact that they recycle. They recycle the water, they recycle the actual atmosphere in there, the oxygen, the carbon dioxide. And essentially what you put in is essentially what you have constantly got in there, recycling on a regular basis. So they're an easy thing to develop and an easy thing to make.
Well, they're a biosphere.
They are.
And to give you, I suppose, an insight into another biosphere, the planet is a biosphere. It's a controlled environment in the vastness of space. It's just that we have a small controlled environment in the vastness of our lounge rooms or bathrooms.
And it comes back to that, there was a fabulous experiment back in the 90s where they developed a biosphere, a separate biosphere, a giant one in the Arizona desert, which was essentially a whole series of terrariums, really,
Yes.
wasn't it? And different types of systems. But look, you can have a terrarium at home and you can actually create it. And what water you actually put in these systems stays in these systems. So they're very good for water saving.
It's a very simple process, and we'll take you through it now.
So how do you make a terrarium? Well, look, there's a whole range of ways in which you can do this. One of the easiest ways is just in a simple recycled jar, something of that sort of size. Otherwise, you can go for a case like this, or you can use an aquarium, an old aquarium with a lid, anything that can be sealed up and allows light to penetrate. So what other types of things do you need? Well, you need a good quality potting mix, and a potting mix such as an Australian premium mix is the way to go. And the premium mix also needs to be moist to start with, and it's better to add your water now in the mix rather than later on, because it's often very easy to overwater a terrarium because it doesn't actually drain very well. So to do this, just add a little bit more water to your potting mix, and that will just make this quite a dampish sort of mix to work with, but that is ideal for a terrarium. So you're adding most of your water straight to the terrarium base.
When it comes to nutrition, you don't really need much fertiliser, because whatever you put in will stay in there. Using slow release fertiliser is always a good idea though, just a good handful through the mix before you put it in. Now onto the plants. You can go with any theme for your terrarium, whether that be a xerophyte or dry landscape, but for this moment we're going with the moist landscape. So sort of rainforesty, using a lot of ferns like all of these here, and a lot of the ground covers like the mosses, the lichens, and even the small leaf baby tears like that.
Now look, a couple of things to remember. Rocks are a really good one to start with because they give you an idea of forming the landscape, if you like. So what you're trying to achieve here is, it's to some degree, is a natural looking environment. So we're going to add a bit of rock in there, and you don't have to be you know, really artistic with this. It can be just an assorted pile of rock. You can try some loose stones in there as well. It just adds a little bit of bulk and adds a bit of difference and undulation, if you like, to the actual landscape inside the terrarium itself. Now, once we've got our rocks in place, we can actually add a bit of potting mix into that and sort of mould around the actual rocks themselves. Now, additionally, the rocks provide a little bit, or take up a little bit of the space inside there, so we're not using actually as much potting mix in there. Exposing some rocks here and there is always a nice thing to do. We can bring up a little bit of a higher edge up the back, always try and make the higher part of your terrarium at the back of the terrarium, and you view that terrarium from one side through the front.
It's a pretty basic design principle of putting your lower stuff at the front and your taller stuff at the back, which draws your eye backwards, giving the illusion of space and size.
Very much so. And look at what Tino's done here. He's started to divide this little fern up, and you can actually flatten that root system out, just mould that out, get it into a flatter sort of root zone like that. And once we have that, we can start placing our plants. Now the idea here is, don't actually plant them just yet, just place them and see how they look from the front.
Now I've broken these up into different sizes and densities because in nature you're going to have different sized plants dotted throughout the landscape. I think that one there might need a little bit of work. Don't be too scared to rip some of the roots off. The good thing about using these terrariums is, as Marcus said, the moisture that you put in there stays in there. So there's no real chance, unless you're completely lazy, of the terrarium drying out.
Now from time to time, you need to take that terrarium around, have a good look at it from what you see being the front of the actual container itself, because you want this to look just like a little landscape out of a natural scene, isn't it?
Exactly.
And we've also got some really attractive moss here, which we can use in a minute, and that gives a bit of colour. Use variations of plants in here, different sort of foliage textures, different sort of colours as well.
Now these are all moisture loving plants, so they'll do well in a very moist environment. As I said before, if you wanted to choose a drier environment, you need to choose succulent or cactus plants. But these are great little ground covers. The moss, the lichen and the Biospheres.
Now most of these things can be planted fairly close together in this sort of environment. That's not a problem. And yeah, we can put another little fern in there too. And the more denser the planting, the actual better it looks in many cases. So let's get a few more planted up the back. What we might do, mate, is get a little bit of variety. What about some coarser
Do you want some of
ferns
them?
in
Yeah,
there?
for sure.
We've got this sort of stuff here. This is a little bit of liverwort, which is a little ground cover. It's essentially a plant that grows on nursery pots as well, and a lot of nursery people think this is a weed, don't they?
Yes.
But it looks great.
This is a good sign that you're watering well, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
it certainly is.
There we
But look
go.
at the foliage difference there in something like that. It looks absolutely terrific. You can really accentuate some of the rocks that we've put in here. There's a wonderful little piece of rock just in here which has a few fossils in it, and it looks quite interesting, so I'm going to keep that as a bit of a feature. Now with a big fern like this, the bigger the stuff, the better up the back. And if the leaves are too long and too tall, we can actually reduce the size of some of those. Notice I'm just sort of pinching them out just a little bit lower down and just reducing that. So what we're doing is a little bit of leaf pruning essentially. Once again, I'm just sort of flattening out that root base. Ferns have really fibrous roots and they're easy to do this way, and they work quite well. So what we're going to do, we're going to tuck that in up the back here. Now the great thing about this sort of case, this particular one, it has a pitched roof, and because of that we can actually plant plants that are a little bit higher in there and still get a really good result. And you can see there we've only been going, what, 5 minutes, if that, a few minutes, and then we're already starting to get a bit of a really attractive feel in there.
It is a good idea to use different textures. As we've used the rocks, you can use wood, as long as they're nice and natural, or going for the theme that you're actually trying to emulate in your Edwardian or your Wardian case.
So with this little bit of sand, I've got here a little bit of coarse washed sand, and this is beautiful. When it's rinsed off with a little bit more water as a finishing feature, it looks really attractive, and we can sort of get that into little areas to almost give the impression of a small stream or something else that might be winding down the hillside there, and finish that off at the front with a little bit more of that sand.
As far as ongoing maintenance goes for your terrarium, you need to look in it. So you need to keep this glass clean just by using a moist cloth. Don't use detergents. And also water it, using a misting or a spray system like this here. But as we said before, it's an enclosed environment, so don't overwater.
So now that you've watered it, mate, we can close her up, and she's going to be sealed in there now. And basically, that'll be a few months before you'll look at watering that one again.